I'm Steve Miller, your host tonight. We're well into our third year of monthly webinars. And tonight we started on time in order to finish on time. Links to the recording and slides will be given to all people registered. Title of our talk tonight is Dreaming, Planning, Designing, and then finally Building Two Dream Houses. Over the years, we have featured many topics, but I always relish a case study of how things were either done or could be done. And tonight is a story of not one, but two case studies of houses. And our featured speaker is Jacob Brown, who was a coach and teacher at Ridgewood High School in New Jersey. Jacob and I were chatting, and he told me some things about himself that are interesting. He was always hands-on, and during summer breaks from teaching, he was fixing up houses. And his interest in highly energy-efficient homes began with an invited speaker to the Ridgewood High School, there to motivate the students, but who also motivated Jacob, the teacher, into learning about passive houses. And then Jacob was hooked. And so tonight we learned the dreams, the plans, the designs, and contrast the actual construction of two different houses, one new and one almost a century old. So now I'll turn the baton over to Pat Miller, my wife, for logistics. Pat?
Hi, I'm Pat, and I'm going to be taking care of the Q&A when we do it. I think Jacob is going to talk about his Vermont house first, and then we'll have questions after that, and then he'll talk about the New Jersey house, and we'll have Q&A at the end. If you would put your questions into the chat, then I can see them easily, and we'll get started right away. Oh, and Jacob, I'm turning it over to you.
All right. Hello, everybody. I hope that this can be an exciting thing for you. It ended up being quite an excitement for my wife and I over the years. I start with a picture that's really of the outline. I will use my cursor to show where I am on a picture. The first thing I'm going to mention about is what we call Southwoods. We call the Vermont house Southwoods because it's in the woods south of Mount Snow. We're Mount Snow skiers. And a few years back at this point, we had an opportunity to sell a house that we had at a good profit and build a new house. And as part of that process, I got turned on to the passive house movement, and we were able to build this passive house. Now, I was mainly an observer in this process, and I'm going to take you through some of this. But the real thing that happened with us was that we got to live in this house, and I'll get to that in a minute. But then we're going to talk briefly about the three stages that we did at our house in New Jersey. That's the 53 Abington house. It was built in 1928, and we decided to do what's called a retrofit, and I'll get into the explanation of that. The basement of that house is a whole thing. The house walls were quite a project, and then the roof, of course. So we're going to divide that talk on the retrofit into those three areas. Then, of course, there were some problems to mention, but then the value of bothering to do this to a 1928 house instead of tearing it down. And then, of course, we'll have a summary. But let me show you this Vermont house. This is right after we finished with it. It's a 3,300 square foot house. The solar panels the first year basically paid for, and it's an all electric house. The solar panels basically the first year paid for everything, but then we started using it more and we didn't quite make the nut each time. But basically it's an all electric house and we don't pay for much electricity. We have an electric car and it's just an amazing space to live in, which I'll get to in a sec. This is what we base our work around. The Passive House Network. It's an organization really that started in Germany a number of years ago. And if you go down the rabbit hole of learning all about passive house, one of the things you discover is that it is really the best way to build a high efficiency, no carbon, all electric house. There was recently a study presented in their network that had a fellow who looked at houses all throughout the country that had used different design issues and passive house kept basically outpacing the competition in almost every category. The key to passive house is building an envelope, having the house with no air moving in and out of the house as much as you can do. And our Vermont house used the zip system of and a taped zip system, a plywood, as a way to create its envelope. You'll see with the retrofit, we used a different system. The other thing that the house in Vermont with new construction used a double wall construction, 2 sets of 2x4s with a 4-inch space between, basically a 14-inch thick wall to get a lot of insulation. Those walls were filled with cellulose insulation, and it created a house that was, the air is it's a very airtight house and very well insulated. I show this picture to illustrate the idea of what's called a thermal bridge. Now, this will be something we talk about a little bit more, but if you've ever watched a house grow up, the roof rafters come out and create the eave. But in a envelope house, you cut them off here, put the envelope in place, then you build the eave separately and bolt it in place. And allowing wood to go through the envelope is called a thermal break or a thermal bridge. And passive house construction, you work very hard to prevent those thermal breaks. The windows, they're triple latched and triple paned. The doors are the same. The foundation of this house was a prefab built on the, in the factory, so to speak. And this is simply an amazing process. I got to tell you, these guys put this up. They had it all staged. All right. They got there at 7:30 in the morning. They'd come the night before to make sure the footing gravel was in place properly. They got there at 7:30 in the morning, and they were taking bets with each other would they finish before lunch. And they finished by about 11:45. You could have started the next phase. It was just an amazing process to watch. But these things, these have 6,000 a pound cement, so they don't need separate waterproofing. We did very well with the blower door test. If you don't know about blower door test, you might ask me some questions about it. It's a big part of efficiency houses, is having a blower door test that does well. The other piece of it is that it's got to have an energy recovery ventilation system. Zender makes the one that we use. It's a Dutch company, and it's like, I consider it part of the family. So I say, hey, the Zender is really working hard today or something. But it exchanges fresh air from the outside and takes stale air from the inside. It exchanges it in this box, which is about almost the size of a washing machine. So the air temperature is then equalized, and you lose very little energy. So if it's warm inside, cold outside, the air outside, the fresh air is heated from the warm air inside. It's basically a thermal exchange. And they say that inside here is about a football field size of surface membrane to make this exchange. So Zender is a big thing. And of course, we use solar panels in Vermont to make most of our electricity. And the Vermont house, the other aspect of the Vermont house that is notable, it's an open concept house. And this is very much different than what we were challenged with the 1928 Colonial, because you don't have open concept houses. So with the open concept house, it's much easier to air manage and have things work well. Okay, so what happened with the Vermont, just to go back, there's my mom and my dog sitting, but what you don't understand until you live in the house, because you build this house and you think, hey, it's a neat house, it's going to be efficient, it's going to save money, what a neat idea. You live in this house, the air management, it is so quiet because of the thickness of the walls. The air is so clean and the house is so fresh, and there is no drafts in the house. I mean, it can be blowing 10 miles, it can be 10 degrees outside. The air, the wind is going 10 miles an hour, and you're sitting in there having a glass of wine and cheese and crackers, and you don't know it. There's no drafts in the house, zero, none, nada. And we've experienced minus 23 in this house, which I'm not going to go too far into, but it's amazing how well this house performs. So we love this house, and then I'm retired, and then my wife retires, and we say, what are we doing next? You know, people retire and move away. Well, we live in this magic street in Glen Rock, and we said, you know, we're not leaving. Well, what does that mean? That means we've got to basically renovate our house to age in place. Well, we already love the passive house, so I called up my passive house buddies, actually, and I said, hey, Roger, his name's Roger. Roger, what should I do? He said, well, learn about retrofitting the old houses, and that's what you do. So we took this night, and it's a long story that I'm only going to tell part of, but we took this 1928 house, we stripped it. You strip everything off it, because in the 1928 house, you make a decision, you're not tearing it down, so you're going to leave the bones in place. The framing is, you're not going to change the framing like we had new framing in Vermont. So what you do, you strip it and you add the insulation to the outside of the house. Our house is basically all the way around about 6 inches fatter than it was at the beginning of this process. So you strip it, and notice that it had a nice skirt around it here. See that? And that's gone. And then we wanted the same house back, and this is what it looks like today. It used to look like that, and now it looks like that. And the rest of my talk, and with this might be a first place for a pause for some pictures, if not pictures, for questions if you want. I thought that the rest of the talk is going to talk about the process of what it took for us to go from this through that to this. So a moment for a question or not?
There are no questions in the chat, but
Okay.
there's one comment. Christian
Okay.
says he believes that Zender is a Swiss company.
It might, you know what? I was always told it was Dutch. I'm not sure. They have some competitors out there, and maybe they make them both places. I could be wrong.
Okay. Well, we do have a couple of questions now. So, Mark wants to know, did you insulate between the double wall, which I think you said you did?
Yes.
What?
Yes, that they had to put those, if you remember that picture, they had to put those muslin right here. They had to create with this muslin a cavities so that the cellulose wouldn't all fall to the bottom. So they had cavities in that double wall. Then they came in and slid them like this, and then they pumped the air in from the big truck they had outside. So yes, it's packed 2x4, 4 inches, 2x4. It's packed with this cellulose. It's quite remarkable, actually.
Okay. Brian asks, did you use mini splits?
Yes, they're in the Vermont house, 2,300 square feet. We have 5 mini splits. Yeah, and they're ductless mini splits. What ended up happening, we have 2 compressors with this system. by the accident of we were going for Vermont efficiency standards, and I guess Mitsubishi, they're at the time, and we built this in 2015. At the time, their compressor that would fit this 5 mini split system wasn't certified for to meet Vermont efficiency. So we split it. We bought 2 smaller compressors that met the Vermont efficiency standard. So we got 2 compressors up there. They're still real quiet, but we have 5 mini splits, and they heat and cool the. We never use the cooling upstairs up in Vermont, but they heat the house nicely.
Yeah. Robert asks, and I've wondered this myself, with mini splits, how do you heat the bathrooms?
That's okay. You know, that's a good thing about how passive house is with the air management, because the bathrooms are where the exhaust air is exhausted out of bathrooms to the Zender, because bathrooms, number one, produce the humidities and produce the smells. So you want the exhausts to go out of the bathrooms, and then the fresh air comes into the bedrooms and the living spaces. That process of air movement is basically what keeps the house warm. It's not so much the mini splits. I mean, obviously they make the warmth coming out, but that Zender keeps the air moving around the house.
Okay.
So,
and
yeah.
it can go through the door cracks.
Oh yeah, yeah.
and things like that.
It's what people, you know, until you live in one of these enveloped houses, it really is an envelope. It really is tight. There really are no drafts. So the air movement is slow but continuous, and just very efficient, and just keeps everything, you know, just all even up, as you will.
Great. Robert also wonders, does the ERV exchange water vapor?
Yeah, it equalizes humidity. It has a drain at the bottom that actually the little thing sometimes leaks, and I got to do something about that. But yes, it deals with the vapor too. It deals with humidity. The house in Vermont has a very low humidity. It's always under, 45%. And I don't have a dehumidifier in the house at all. And I've almost never used the mini splits have a dehumidification. The ductless mini splits do have a dehumidification function, but I've never used it in Vermont. In New Jersey, this typical I'll get to this, but we need some dehumidification down here. But yeah. So where are we in questions? Because I shouldn't.
Okay, just 2 more.
Okay.
This is one of my pet peeves about heat pumps in New Jersey. Brian says, I was told I would need a gas backup for my mini splits. Do you need that? I know the answer is no, because you're all electric.
We've never, we've just never had a problem.
Yeah. So Brian, tell him that it gets down to minus 23 degrees in Vermont, and they don't need gas.
And we don't need gas. Now, what Vermont, okay, so a little sidebar on this. Green Mountain Power started a program where they help homeowners put in Tesla walls. And their motivation is they have something to draw from when they need power. And my motivation is I don't need a generator. So I have a Tesla wall, which should last, a couple of days. Let's say it's snowed and my panels are covered with snow and it's pretty cold and I lose my power. It's happened to a friend of mine. Hasn't happened to us, but happened to a friend of mine up there. And he had, his Tesla walls lasted for about 2 days. And frankly, that would give me enough time to run down to Jersey and grab my gas-powered generator. But it's, to me, you either do it or you don't. You either go or you don't go. And
okay. One last question now is Mark says, the old school HVAC guys tell me the house needs to breathe. What do you say to them? Well, that's what that's the ERV. That's
the ERV. It's the lungs of the house. It's I exchange the air, the filters, and it's remarkable what the incoming filter picks up. And when you turn it up, I mean, you usually run it on low, but if you turn it up to high, you can actually hear the air moving around. It moves the air. I mean, it's not a joke. And yeah, it's so.
Okay, we'll hold the questions for now, and
All right.
you can go ahead.
All right,
And
so
keep putting your questions in the chat if you have them.
yeah, so we yes. I put this in first just to recognize the fact that we went all electric. Okay. When we did the project 2 years ago, my electrician couldn't get a 300 amp panel, so we put in 250 amp panels. We probably could have done with 200, but he said, you know, in the future, we already have one electric car. We'll probably get another one. At any rate, that's a recognition that this is an electrified house. And my wife, who's a big cook, has adjusted and actually likes and this is a induction heat surface, but you know, we cook without gas. Now, I'm going to start with the basement. And 1928, this was where our problems became interesting. Let's put it that way. So part of this, you know, we renovated part of the house, put in new systems, and we also added to the house, but then we retrofitted the house. So part of we added to the back a little bit, but one of the things to look at is, we'll come back to, oh, wait, I'm sorry, I'm going too fast. We'll come back to this wall. I want you to think about and remember this wall. Any rate, we did the basement. Now you find when you retrofit a basement in an old house, you really basically have to tear it out and dig it down because there's not enough space to put all the 6 inches of insulation and all what you have to do. Fortunately, my contractor had experience in this, and you basically do just exactly what you might think. You jackhammer the thing, and unfortunately, due to the size, they couldn't get a machine in here to dig, so they dug it by hand. His guys, they were amazing. They dug down by hand. They found underneath the old from 1928. This is like a 4-foot Texaco sign. This is like 4 foot in diameter. It's pretty crazy. It's too bad it wasn't in better shape. Now, one of our first surprises, and maybe the biggest surprise, was that we discovered that this clay, the dirt around the house, is a very firm clay. And the contractor in 1928 basically dug the clay straight down and used it as a form. This is a poured cement foundation, and they used the clay as a form. So what we had was this part of this wall is just pocked and not very smooth, and will create, as you're going to see in the future here, a real problem for us trying to get the envelope. They also don't have a footer. Notice that. There's no footer. They just plopped the pour on the dirt. Now, the dirt was very firm, but that was all interesting. So you can see that having such pock holes, you know, this was a challenge for the crew. What we did when we added to the back of the house, we added an entryway, a new entryway. So we did that the new way, blocks and tar, and then we try to blend it with this wall that had all the holes in it. Now, passive house is you tar for the envelope, then you insulate. But where we had all those pocks, holes, we had to like pour foam. They poured so much foam in there, it was nuts. Okay, to try to, you know, make up for that space. Now, once you dig the basement down, you get it down far enough, you got 6 inches of this sub-tiara insulator board. Okay, 6 inches of this, 2, 2, and 2 on top of your slag. or your stone. We had to do footers for obviously the supports, and because we had to dig below where the footers weren't, we had to dig below the old line of the poured foundation wall. We had to create basically they created a swimming pool for the foundation pour. But before doing that, they needed to do the envelope. So we had this 15-inch Mylar. This green stuff is 15 millimeters thick. And we basically created a swimming pool with this for the cement that was going to be, or the concrete that was going to be poured in later on. And this creates the envelope, the airtight envelope with the insulation, and then do the standard basement with rebarb. And I put this is in out of order. These stones, this picture should have been a little earlier, but obviously had to have a stone foundation. And then they did the cement pour. And again, in this small, tiny space, and this is where, you know, your contractors who do this, they have to know what they're getting into, because this was a lot of hard. These guys really just busted this day. They worked so hard to move this concrete and move it around, and then had to smooth it out and all of that kind of stuff. We, of course, the other thing about my old house, and this is an important thing that people need to think about moving forward. This house was an above grade from the town sewer system. So it needed to have a pump if you have your laundry down there, which we wanted to do, and we needed a sump pump. We'll talk about sump pumps later in terms of passive house, but this was all because the house was below grade, and part of that was getting rid of the water. So we have all the downspouts, and this house basically has a higher backyard, and my neighbors behind the house are higher yet. So the water from a good rain will run down to our backyard. And I've got drains in the backyard that also connect to the downspout drains. And when we have a good rain, we have a good little bit of water coming out of the pipe in the front of the house. So that's something else that people need to think about. And since we lived there, I knew all about this water issue moving forward. But if you have a property where, as they say, the drain pipes can go to daylight, and you don't have to do the below grade equipment, it makes life a lot easier. Then once you've got your basement floor done, you're going to also insulate that wall. You got it insulated on the outside, and you had a 2-inch foam board on the inside. Okay. So this gets people thinking about the basement, okay? And I thought, didn't we say I'd take a few questions at the basement time? If you want, before I go to the walls of the house? Or should I just, what do you think?
I don't think we have anything.
Okay, all right. So I'll do
about
walls
that.
now, and then people can be thinking about. I showed a picture a little earlier from further back that showed the naked house, the stripped house. And this is what you went down to. The fascia boards that were, way back in 1928 were nailed to the 2x4s. And actually, in this house, they really are 2x4s. And you strip the house. And then for the envelope, and this is different than what they did in Vermont. Remember, they used the zip system of plywood that's basically airtight. Here they use a material called Adhero 3000. It's pretty thick. It comes on it's a backing. It's glued on a backing, and you strip it off, and then you put it over the house. You basically wrap this house in this material called Adhero 3000. It's quite impressive. It's pretty thick. And these guys, it was hard work, because these guys, in order to take it off, have the backing get off, and then smooth it out all over the place. It was really quite interesting they worked hard, and I just watched and took pictures, but they were working hard to basically wrap the house to airtight. The idea is we're making this house airtight with this blue Adhero. Now, at this point, we hadn't changed the windows. These are still the old windows and doors, and we hadn't pulled the roof off yet. As an aside, I had solar panels on this house since 2010. And unfortunately, as part of this process, I had to have the panels taken off, and that's another whole story. But the panels had to come off, but we haven't done that yet either. The other thing, notice, if people who are curious about this, wait. Notice my eave here, right here. And if you remember, I showed you an eave from Vermont. That's not the one. Where they tacked the eave on, they bolted it on and didn't have thermal bridges. We didn't do that here. I'll talk about that later, but this shows that we left the old eaves on here, although we pulled the skirt off here. So now we've airtighted the house. Now we got to insulate it, and we use a product called Gutex, which is a wood fiber product. And, insulation takes a lot of space. You should have seen bringing it in on a truck. This wasn't very heavy, but boy, took a lot of space. So they brought all this Gutex in, and they wanted 5 inches. So they had 2-inch pieces and 3-inch pieces. And basically, it was putting a big jigsaw together on the house for the workers who did it. And again, there's Feliciano working. Sometimes they'd have to cut it and get it just right. And I got some other pictures here's kind of at the corner of this construction, but I got some other pictures that'll show how that looked. Now, one of the things we discovered that we hadn't anticipated was that we wanted a certain shingle look with hardy plank, and my contractor's checking things out, and we were going to put the energy model said we'll put furring strips up and put the hardy planks up. Fine. Well, hardy planks can't go on furring strips, we discovered, so we had to put another layer of smooth plywood on the house. So the house got kind of doubled up in a way. Because it needed a smooth surface to look okay. And then hardy planks need what's called a drip plane. So my contractor looked into it. We'd already developed the use of this Adhero 3000. So we just did it again. They made the house blue again with the Adhero 3000. So here's the second time blue. And this was after they put the windows in. Now they've got the windows in, the door in, and the second time blue, and now we're ready for the hardy plank. And this is pretty cool stuff. Hardy plank, you never need to paint, you never need to do anything. It looks awesome. We have hardy planks in Vermont, 2015. What's that, 9 years ago? Looks like they put up yesterday. You never have to do anything to them. It's pretty remarkable. So here's our hardy planks. Now, the other thing about that might generate some questions, how do you deal with the windows? Okay, because this is the window before the insulation was put on. And you're making the house 6 inches thicker, 7, well, everything else about 6, 7, or 8. Where do you put the window? Do you put the window inside or outside or in the middle? And there's a debate in Passive House envelope when you really geek down to it as to where to put it. Well, we wanted the look of the window on the outside. That's what we had in Vermont, and it gives a neat windowsill inside. So the contractor had to create basically a window box. so that the windows could be supported properly outside the framing of the house. And that created an interesting additional thing that they had to put the envelope around. And this is another picture showing how they put 2 inches, then 3 inches, and adhero around the window box. The other thing interesting about the windows, you use window clips. These windows, you know, they're very tight. They're triple seal and latched all over the place, but they need to maintain their integrity in terms of being 90 degrees and all of that. So you can't put a screw through the frame of the window. So they use these clips to basically allow the window almost to float in the box. So it's not, you know, if there was a warp in the box or the frame of the house, it's not going to affect the window and the integrity of the window. So you use these clips to, and Wythe Windows, where we got the windows, they had a little seminar for the workers from my project. They went up to Wythe and learned to make sure they get it just right. And then the window is put on the outside of the work that we're doing. And again, when the finish, the window is outside. We wanted very much to have the same looking house. And what this does, it creates a neat little windowsill inside the house, which you can put things on if you want to. Doors, same thing as the windows. They take the door off and then they'd use the clips and they put the door in place and they'd put the door back in place. Triple seal, 1, 2, 3, and latches all around. Where's my latch? All right, so now that's the Zender. We've talked about it, whether they're Dutch or Swedish, I actually don't know for sure. But what was fun was it was the first time the HVAC guy was a guy that had worked for my contractor for years. He'd never installed one. And he had fun. It was really good how he got into it. He would come to work in the morning and say, you know, I was watching videos last night and I'm reading up on it. And he and his son would go up there and, you know, they made it work. They learned how to install one of these things. Go ahead, Steve, give me the next picture. And then this is a picture of the ducted mini splits. There are 2 of them up there. So these mini splits, you know, our heat pumps work the same as the ductless mini splits that sit on walls that we have a familiar look for. But they use the ducts, and they were able to use a lot of our old air conditioning ducts. They had to add some also. But the ducted mini splits also, you know, are an important part of the management of this house. And it had to happen because of the smaller rooms. You know, I mentioned in the Vermont house, we had a circumstance where, you know, because of the open concept, the ductless mini splits on the walls worked well, but here we needed the addition of ducts. Go ahead, Steve, give me another picture there. And see, here's the traditional ductless mini split that sits on the wall. We got one in the attic and one in the basement. Go ahead, Steve, do the next one also. Now, here is a big challenge. This is the seam between the house wall and the eave of the roof. And it doesn't take much to look at that and say, that is a mess. And we had a real challenge trying to get the envelope to work in this spot. Go ahead, hit next picture, Steve. One of the things we did, of course, was to use foam, spray foam insulation. And one of the things spray foam does, it fills holes. It helps create your envelope. It doesn't just insulate the space, but it fills the holes. Go ahead, Steve, with another one. Now, here, I use this picture to show, I'm sorry I can't have my cursor on it, but you can see this is part of the skirt that we stripped off the house, and then we built it, we bolted it, built it, and then bolted it back on the house after you had made the house the envelope. See, here's the adhero underneath, and you can see the same thing with the next picture, but all the adheros underneath, and you build it out. Now, Interesting thing with this house, and if anybody gets involved with this kind of thing, there's a real question in the business. Do you cut the eaves of the roof off and redo them? Or do you leave them on and adhere around them? Our energy modeler went for having the guys put this adhero around these eaves, and they were up on high ladders. They worked like dogs. Go ahead, hit with the next one. And I'm not so sure that it was the best way to go. My buddy in Central Jersey, he had his eaves cut off and the envelope made just tight around the house. Who knows which is best, but it's two ways to do things out there. Now, once the roof was ready to go, I think based on the time, I should just go through the roof and we can do questions all at once at the end. What do you think, guys? Again, 6 inches, this was a roof diagram as part of those of you who want to come back and geek out on this diagram. It's got insulation between the rafters, and it's got, you know, lines here as to where the envelope is, and you got furring strips. Go ahead to the next picture, Steve. One of the things they did, if you look closely at this picture, you can see they created a rim around the construction here, around the roof, and they created that rim as a way to have the 6 inches of insulation sit in its place. Go ahead, next picture. And the 6 inches, here he is, he's using these long screws, and the screws were like 10, 12 inches long, and with big washers to hold the screw in place, and they would drill them in and have this highly insulated surface over the top of your roof. Go ahead with the next one, Steve. Once they did all of that, then they had to put down furring strips, and then the plywood over the furring strips, because you got to have you know, a surface for the shingles. And you can see the very long screws. Go ahead with the next picture. Very, very long screws. The guys were all roped up. And you can see again how we had to have the adhero come down and wrap around the eaves. Go ahead, next one. One of the things that had to happen, these furring strips had to make sure that the nails from the roofers didn't penetrate the envelope, because that's the other thing about these constructions. Once you start putting your envelope in, you have to minimize what we call penetrations, have to minimize how many holes you put in your envelope. So obviously you got all those roofing nails. You had to have that that space. Go ahead with the next picture, so that the roofing nail didn't penetrate. You also needed a couple of spots where the moisture, this was on the back roof, they had to create some holes to allow moisture movement. Go ahead for the next one. Has nothing to do with retrofit passive house, but the renovation of 1928. We needed to replace the water line to the street. Go to the next slide. We needed to replace the sewer line to the street. Go to the next slide. It went a little nuts. But this shows how hard it was. I threw this picture in, and maybe how hard it was for these guys to wrap the envelope around this eave without cutting it off. Go ahead with the next one. The other challenge we faced was where the cement, right, from the house interfaced, you know, normally there's a sill plate here, interfaced with the wood part of the house. Well, 1928, this is kind of a mess. So we put adhero over it. Go ahead with the next one. We use lots of foam. Oh, go back one if you could, Steve. Can you go back one? Thank you. Yeah. So we put adhero down, and if you remember back to the foundation part, we used a lot of foam. We used that insulator board, and we tried to connect the envelope from the basement part, exterior basement wall, to the house wall. Since we haven't done our final blower door yet, we're not quite sure how successful we were. But go ahead with the next one. Couple of issues that we had with our house. We did not want to lose our fireplace, so we left our fireplace in place. That's a big kind of question mark when you do retrofits of older houses. We actually haven't used the fireplace yet with the envelope. We're going to see how it works. I think we're just going to have to open some windows. We'll see. That's ongoing, but we just didn't want to, from a design beauty point of view, we didn't want to get rid of the fireplace. But it's all sealed. Behind this screen right now is all sealed up. This picture I use again to just reiterate the challenge of the basement. 1928 house, no footer, 1928 house. The dirt was the cement form, and then the foundation that you have to get rid of so you can go down far enough to get the insulation that you need. Go ahead. And the other piece of the 1928 house, I put a picture of a survey in there to show that, you know, they built these houses closer to the property lines than you're allowed to today. So this house has easement, you can't do this anymore. So if we had torn down the house and lost this footprint, we would have lost a great deal. So it really, keeping that footprint, I think, can be a big motivator for people who are doing this kind of thing. Go ahead to the next slide. Oh, and here's the other thing about the 28 Colonial. Look at this entryway. How cool is this? Just you walk in, you got your dining room, you got your stairs, you go to your living room. You just can't beat this. And we really wanted to preserve the feel of this house. Go ahead with the next one. We also wanted to keep we had done some renovations in 2004. We had put in a new bathroom upstairs. Go ahead to the next one. We had put in a new kitchen. Go ahead to the next one. And now, this, of course, is part of the retrofit, and it's symbolic. That's our gas line. We've turned it off and capped it. We decided, you know, I talked to the plumber about it. Didn't make any sense to try to tear it out. It's there for the future, but I don't think it'll ever get used. But it is kind of symbolic of the of the project, if you will. Go ahead to the next one. So that enveloped house, you know, this is kind of a summary, no carbon, gas pipe off, the enveloped house, and then hit me with the next one, lots of insulation. And you've got this amazing house, you know, ready to go. Now, to moving forward, I'm kind of coming to the end of my remarks here. Hopefully you guys got some questions and things like that, but go to the next one, Steve. We haven't done our blower door yet. Okay. And we'll see what that turns out to be. But blower doors, I suspect that people who are watching this, a lot of you know about blower doors, because new construction of any sort is starting to expect a decent blower door number. I mean, it's something that you don't have to be a passive house aficionado to want a house that you know, is efficient and doesn't leak too much of the nice heat or cool air that you put in there. So having a blower door that is pretty decent is important. Go ahead to the next one. And the other thing I don't know about this house yet, we haven't sort of lived with it yet enough, whether it'll need a makeup air device. Our Vermont house is so tight that it needs a makeup air just even to allow the stove fan to work. And if people don't understand makeup air devices, you can maybe ask me some questions about it. We're not sure yet until we get the blower door and see, because right now the fan above the stove works well enough without the makeup air, and it might be that's just, we won't put a makeup air in this house. Go ahead with the next one. We still have our driveway to finish, and however, go to the next one, because we love this house. This house is fully functional right now. All the air management is working, all the heating, cooling is working, and it's just a wonderful house. at the point of we're still hanging a few pictures here and there, but oh my God. And let me just say that, in fact, maybe go to the last picture here and I'll make a couple of, this is the same outline that I showed at the beginning of the talk. But let me reiterate, people say things to me like, well, will you ever make up the cost, and et cetera, et cetera. And I say, I don't care, because guess what? The first day this house got turned on, we get to live in the house. And until you actually live in one of these houses, you don't understand, is the best way I can say it. And I had an interesting experience. I mentioned at the beginning of the talk that the friend of mine that he worked for Wright Builders, his name was Roger, he was my connection to Passive House. He's a skier, and I guess it was 2 years ago, he needed to come to Mount Snow and go to a clinic. And he came to our house and he stayed for a couple of days. And as he was leaving, he said, thank you. He said, I had never stayed in one of these houses. This is amazing. And he'd been building these houses for years, and he'd never stayed overnight in one of them. And it's one of my tales that I tell. Until you get to experience one of these houses, it's pretty amazing. Any rate, I think that might be enough of me, and maybe we can do some questions.
Thank you so much, Jacob. That was just fascinating. Yes, there are quite a few questions in the chat. I think we'll skip the one on the roof because I think you covered that pretty much detail. But here's a good one. David wants to know, for the retrofit, how many contractors did you have to work with? Or did one manage the whole job? And how did you find your contractors?
Well, I got so lucky, because I was starting to interview contractors, and I would come into the dining room and we'd sit down, and their eyes would glaze over, and I'd know I was going to get nowhere. And I went to a wedding and I met up with a former student. Remember, I was a teacher for many years, and I knew he was a contractor, but I thought he was small time and didn't have, enough to do this. And I told him what I was doing. He said, hey, I'd like to take a look at the project. Turned out he has a pretty big business, and he was very interested. His eyes, as I was telling him about Passive House, his eyes were lighting up. And he said, my guys will get into this. And we used all his subs. And he can, he's built houses. He's kind of got a lot of stuff going on, and it's DJR Renovations, Don Rick, and he's on my I have him referenced on my website. So I got very lucky. I didn't have to deal with subs. I trained some subs. I mean, I'm telling them, I'm on site telling the plumbers about, you can't put holes in the house without sealing it, and they took me seriously. So I didn't have to deal with a lot of subs, but I was very, very lucky. Yeah.
And then a follow on, how long from engaging the first contractor to move in?
Did you hear my groan? It was a 2-year process, but before that, I hired my first guy to make some drawings for me. At first, my friend from Massachusetts was going to try to help me. So, and this was pre-COVID. So my first architect I hired, he got COVID. Then it became clear my Vermont guy couldn't help me, and I got turned on to Xiomara Paredes in Glen Rock. And she fortunately was very interested in Passive House. But then we had to wait through COVID. Then it was what, 20, 21, 22, 23. So it was 22. It was actually 22 before we started digging. So it was a long process, partly stopped by COVID. But the other problem was PSE&G. For 4 months, the job sat. No subs could do anything because certain things had to happen with electricity. And PSE&G just didn't do what they needed to do. I'm sorry, they just didn't do it. And the job sat for 4 months. So anyway,
we have the same complaint about.
Yeah.
about JCP and L2. Okay, Eric says the retrofit has an air exchanger too, question mark. So both houses have air exchangers?
Correct. I mean, the air exchange, as I tell people, the envelope and the air exchanger is really what we're talking about. Okay. If your house isn't well insulated, you're just going to pay more to heat it. But all the other things are secondary to having an envelope that's very, very tight and having an air exchanger that gives you the fresh air. It's all about the Zender. And there's, like I said, there's other competitors in that. It's all about the air exchange. So yes, both houses, any house that talks about passive or anything, it has to have these things. Yeah.
Okay. Mark asked, how thick was the spray foam or what was the R rating in the attic?
Well, the attic's got, outside the attic, it's got the 6 inches. I think we get it up to 30 because it's got the 6 inches of the foam board, three 2-inch layers of foam board. It's got a couple of layers of the plywood. The place we didn't quite follow the model was that after the spray foam, we were supposed to then encase the inside of the rafters, and we didn't do that. So we're probably a little light on the energy model in the rafters. But it's just where we are.
Okay. Mark also asked, did you do anything special for bathroom vents or plumbing vents?
Okay. Bathroom vents, again, it's back to the air management and the Zender. The exhaust from the Zender, as I explained earlier, it comes out of the bathrooms. So you do not have holes in the house to vent your bathrooms. The bathrooms are vented through the Zender exhausts. And what was the other? Okay, so the plumbing thing. The plumbing, you got to just make sure it's sealed. I mean, yeah, obviously pipes have to be vented out the attic as part of the whole sewer circumstance. But as long as that vent is tightly, foamed around before you put the roofing material around it, that's what you got to worry about. I have a picture, actually, it's on my website. The plumber who put the sump pump in, I made a big deal about, hey, he had to cut a hole in the house to have the sump pump, because some pumps can't, you guys probably know this, some pumps can't exit into the sewer. They have to exit to the outside of the house. And so I made a big deal with Ray, his name's Ray, remember, you gotta, and he just did it perfect with his sealant, and I got a great picture of this sealant. It's good. But yeah, it's part of you try to seal all penetrations, I guess is the way to say it.
Okay. A question. Did you have blower door results for both homes, and how did they compare?
Yeah, the quick answer is no, we haven't done the blower door here yet. The good answer, though, the thing, the house in Vermont, we discovered, yes, we have blower door for it. We discovered about partway through the project that the project manager for our Vermont house, had a case of beer bet with another project manager who was building a similar sized house in Massachusetts on who would have the best blower door. And guess what? My manager won the case of beer. And we had a point, anybody who knows blower door numbers, we had a 0.17 blower door, and then a practical number of 0.27, which are kind of unheard of numbers. But what was cool was they do a preliminary blower door before they actually close the walls, so you can check how you're doing. And my project manager was, during that blower door time, this is in Vermont, he was running around and his assistant were running around with the spray foam and the smoke machine to find the holes. They were totally motivated. no worker bee unders were doing that. It was the managers who were doing it. And so the Vermont house is exceedingly tight. And we'll see what the house down. The house here is not going to throw that kind of a number. We're just hoping that we beat the 1.0 standard, get it below 1. It's just tough with old construction to really seal it up. But
yeah, I can see that.
we just haven't done that yet. Yeah.
Bob says, super interesting. You worked hard, did an amazing job. Are there places where you would consider compromising the perfect for the very good?
In my, if you go back to my comment on the air management, you compromise on the insulation, you don't compromise on the penetrations. The air management, in my opinion, is more important than the insulation efficiency. So in that broad base way, yeah, where do you go down the hill from that? We really didn't look into different windows. One of the things, since Darren Macri, who's the owner of Wythe Windows up in Ramsey, he turned me on to this whole process. So I didn't even look at any other windows. And his windows are fabulous, but you probably could get away with maybe a little lesser window, maybe, and door. But that's another area. But again, that's the air management. I hope that helped a little bit. If I had, like I said, I would skimp on insulation and not on air management, I guess is the way to say it.
Okay. Jim asked, do you know why they don't bring the ad hero all the way down over the rim joist?
Yeah, well, actually, they did actually. I didn't get a picture of it. I wasn't there every day. And there were times that I wouldn't be there for a week. They did. And like I tried to say though, getting the connecting that to the cement, the crappy cement left from 1928 was nigh unto impossible. But they did do that. But I got some other pictures on my website that show all the foams that they had around all those insulation boards, or with the dirt and all that stuff. It was kind of an imperfect thing going on around the house. But yeah, they did.
Okay. I think Steve, you might look at Eric's comments. I think maybe he's volunteering to be one of our future speakers.
All
We're
right.
always looking. Yes.
He says
Thank you,
in
Eric.
1988 we built a timber frame house there, and then there's a whole lot with some pictures and everything. I think that's for Steve to consider and see if he wants to get in touch with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's the end.
All right.
Okay. So can I take over?
Oh,
Yeah.
No?
Christian got knocked off, I guess.
Oh.
And he's trying to get back in. Yeah, Steve, you do that, and I want to put my letter link in the chat.
And then you can say a word about it.
Yeah.
We really thank you, Jacob Brown, for volunteering your 2 houses. A little plug that we're always looking for people to talk about their houses, especially electrification case studies. So please consider volunteering. You're going to find it worthwhile and enjoyable. Jacob, how did you feel? Was it enjoyable?
Yeah, once, my wife asked me at the beginning, maybe 2 hours ago, am I nervous? And I said, yeah, I'm a little nervous. But, once I got into talking about these houses, I'm like a preacher man. I'm like a house proselytizer. I love talking about these houses. And so once I got started, I wasn't nervous at all, and I hope I didn't precipitate too much.
Thank you. So we also can help you develop a plan to electrify your house because we have several electrification coaches and probably more on the way who are looking to help you through the planning stages. One additional thing, there's requests to feature more condo type houses and even explore what you can do as a renter. So that's in the future. So Pat, do you have a word?
Yes, I put the last two things in the chat. And I'll just read it here. We all deserve, we've been working with the legislature to try to get the beneficial building electrification bill passed. It's S-249. But the deal is we all deserve cleaner air and affordable energy bills. The good news, our legislators can advance healthier, more affordable homes and buildings with this bill S-249. It enables larger incentives to households and businesses to help pay for electric appliances. It makes it easier for households to choose highly efficient heat pumps and other clean energy upgrades, and ensures we have more options to lower our energy bills. And there's a link to send a letter to your particular legislator. It'll happen automatically, asking them to please support this bill because it's really important for building electrification and for clean energy homes in New Jersey. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Pat. So I'm going to leave the chat up. I'll leave the link up for a few minutes more. I invite you to join us same time, same place on the third Thursday of each month. Next is July 18th at 7 p.m. I'm going to turn off the recording now, but I'm leaving this link up so you can read the chat.
And you're going to copy the chat.